So this conversation is
Hi.
brought to you by ArchiDAO, and we are a DAO, decentralized autonomous organization, where like-minded people come together to explore. And so when provides say that she's a pseudo architect, we should not undermine the fact. So Daniel, would you like to introduce provides to the crowd?
Sure. So we're dealing with a pro here, Provides. She's an academic researcher. She's currently doing her PhD at the Hong Kong University, and she has had experience
Chinese
doing,
University of Hong Kong.
oh, Chinese, okay. And
Yes.
she has done a wide variety of workshops in Cadria and other famous architectural conferences, exploring a variety of diverse topics from AI to solar, what was it, like solar radiation and things like that. And now, more recently, you've been doing like work with Current Cam, which involves a little bit more of a cinematic approach to design and other digital technologies. And you also have several publications out there exploring like a variety of themes. One of them is like blockchain technologies and how that affects BIM and AAC communities. Um, and yeah, so that's what I have for new provides. If you want to give us a little bit of maybe something else that you might want to share with us about what you do.
Yeah, thank you. You got most of them correctly. Yeah, so hi, my name is Provides. I'm currently doing my PhD at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and I'm currently a lecturer at the Bartlett UCL. Yeah, so my research is mostly interdisciplinary. It goes from blockchain, AI to all of the hype technologies that you've heard about or you're dealing with at Architel as well. Um, Extended reality, whatever. But mostly what I want to do, what I like to do is looking at the integration of these technology. That's why for me it's important to put them on the same table and see, what the future might look and feel like. But of course, to take a researcher perspective, which is to look at, what are the social economic challenges, what are the challenges faced by architecture and urban design, and how can we actually apply these tools? Yeah, so coming from both ways.
Yeah, and
Cool.
yeah, that's awesome. And so, yeah, you have a very diverse educational background as well. And uh, based on that, can you tell us like how did you come up with this experience and like what was your current background? So you came from, I think you had gone to do a program in Russia, right? And one of those institutes, I forget what the name of that was.
Yeah,
And then you went from there to the Bartlett, and now, yeah, and now you're a lecturer
yeah.
there.
I guess it's also related to why I call myself a pseudo architect because
Hmm.
legally I'm not licensed architect. And my journey, of course, I started back here in Hong Kong. When I did my bachelor, I probably graduated last in class, and I'm literally just a bad student, not like, she's smart, but then she found it. No, I'm literally just really bad student. And I didn't understand anything. So it was so bad that my own university wouldn't take me back for master, which is why I had to find something else. And so I did my high school in the UK. So I wanted to go to Europe, but like a different country. And so I looked to Germany, and I was very lucky that I found an art institute which provided me a lot of knowledge in continental philosophy, postmodernism, so everything about the intellectual side of things. And I was still a bad student, like you can't change it overnight. So I still graduated last in class. I was being put in a room, and the teachers are telling me, well, if you don't work, we might have to kick you out kind of situation. So I kind of understand the struggle of not being able to understand, or you just have a different learning curve. Like maybe I started learning when I'm 24 or 25. Other people, they're like smarter. They start understanding things when they're 16. So, which is why I also started devoted myself to education and research because I feel like there should be more diversity. I think that's also something that ArchiDAO is aiming for, which is diversity, right?
Hmm.
So if there's 100 student in class, there's one which is like the 100% good, and then there's one which is like 1% good, and all of them should be able to develop their own learning curve. And that's why I think interdisciplinary research is also quite important. And after Germany, I have this continental philosophy influence. I went to Russia, Moscow, which is like a think tank, the Strelka Institute,
Hmm.
the Germany Institute of SEC. Shida, yeah. So at Strauka, what they do is like this super interesting program where they have 30 student a researcher. Half of them is from Russia, half of them not, half of them is architect, half of them not. So it's kind of like this really diverse mix of people. And the program name is The New Normal, led by Professor Benjamin Brereton. So obviously, what it was before the pandemic, right? And he was already
Mm-hmm.
talking about new normal. And he does this hybrid urbanism thing where you're gonna collect all these different ideas, you try to like stitch them together and see what kind of changes it's gonna make. So that kind of broadened my view of, and it also exposed me to stuff like blockchain because, I made this good friend Mark Wilcox who was like doing a blockchain startup,
Mm-hmm.
21E8 in New Zealand, and he brought me to all of his guys and blockchain guys, and I started getting interested in um, yeah, the blockchain stuff. And then I went to UCL to try and really focus on writing, um, guided by Professor Mario Karpel and Professor Frederick Migaru, which focus a lot on digital theory, but also history. So even just like the printing tool, how that's going to change the way we divide labor work between architect and the builder, which I think would also be an important conversation today. And just to learning from how we can learn from the history of technology, is blockchain sort of like a structuralist thinking, meaning we have always used ledger to account, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is blockchain just another version of that, or is it more evolutionary thinking? Like we come from the empire era, and then we go into capitalism, and then maybe, I don't know, communism, socialists, and then all the way to acceleration, blockchain. So that's also how we tend to analyze where we are today and what we can do with it. Yeah, so my journey is like, yeah, like that.
It's been fun.
And now I'm back in Hong Kong. Yeah, it is fun. It is
Yeah.
fun.
And so now that you talked about, you mentioned a little bit like, the current use of blockchain as like this ultimate distributed ledger, right? That it's a worldwide technology, right? Anybody with internet access can pretty much get onto it. What do you see as like the possibilities of blockchain and smart contracts in like the work of architects? Is there specific uses that maybe have been emergent or that you think that architects can use them in like the construction industry?
Yeah. Well, I think we sort of have because we now are entering into a more mature conversation over blockchain. Like when it first came out, it was like this anarchist thing, and obviously the first reaction would be like, it's not for countries or whatever. But now we're in a more mature state where we're trying to negotiate, how we can actually make use of the technology. And so with that, I think we have to contextualize how we use it. Like for instance, first thing, is it a currency? Is it a commodity or asset? Or is it an instrument? Or is it actually a business model? And I think all of these different definitions of blockchain will actually give us different use within the field of architecture, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, currency, maybe we're frictionalizing stake, or the way ownership is going to change how we design. If we're thinking that as a financial instrument, then maybe, or a security instrument, then all it does for us is data protection, right? We don't even need a coin. But if we say that we're using it as an asset or commodity, then obviously maybe it's something to pair with a certain space. So then it's secure value, it trace and track all of the trading or whatever. And obviously, if you're looking in construction industry, then it has something to do with BIM.
Mm-hmm.
Because BIM, it's like the architect interface, and it has a shared data environment where blockchain can secure all the transaction. But if we're saying that on the design industry, then I think that's also what ArchiDAO is more into, right? Like how we can have individual contributors contributing to the same environment, and we can collect a database of diverse design that might
Mm-hmm.
help us to inspire future. So I think it really depends. And there's also the geopolitical factors, like how, for instance, in EU, they have GDPR. They try to regulate virtual or digital currency, but obviously if they think about blockchain as a business model or DAO as a business model, then they can't regulate it on the EU level. They have to regulate it on the country level. And that means that every country will have a different definition. And if we bring it to China, then obviously blockchain has more potential as a central bank digital currency, CBDC. Then it's totally different picture. So I guess we just have to be specific about, what a specific context actually need and how we can manage the risk that it can potentially bring us before we even look at the potential. For me is, yeah.
Very well put up, Provides, like the way you told us about the possibilities. I have a question with how do you think it relates to the productivity of an architect, as an individual? How does that affect the productivity?
Hmm. Well, if I have to, I mean, there's like two white paper that's important in this conversation, right? The first one is the
Hmm.
Bitcoin white paper by Satoshi in 2008. The second one is obviously Christoph Jansk. I don't know if I pronounced his name right. The DAO white paper in 2016, right? And they're actually tackling very different problem, but mostly it's about incentivizing good work within a distributed system and then preventing bad behavior. But actually, that's just it's a democracy problem, right? How can you prevent people from spamming? How can you prevent people from voting? How can you prevent apathy, like people non-action or they don't want to do anything? I mean, the truth is you can't because that will violate democracy, right? So it's almost like how can you make sure an architect being more productive from a system point of view? Like that's the trick question. And the basic answer is basically incentivize and regulate. And no matter if it's the Bitcoin white paper or the DAO white paper, they surround themselves with the same two things. Imagine the good worker and then they imagine the attacker situation, right? So for me, the answer as simple as that, incentivize and regulate. But my problem probably is that the incentivization that Bitcoin gave is reward, right?
Hmm.
Like in terms of stake or sort of monetary reward. And the one that DAO gave is also the same. But I think there's a potential risk that we're misunderstanding speculative financing as a form of collectivity, which makes sense in a Bitcoin situation because it's supposed to be a trustless economy, right? But obviously, as an architect, it's important to build trust, especially within what we see now, which is totally different from 2008 when the financial crisis just happened. So yeah, for me, productivity, it's not just about rewarding the good behavior, but it's also building trust within a network so that we're incentivized because we feel like we are working together with a larger effort and we feel like we are going to achieve something. Because I mean, if we're going to get instant monetary reward, but we feel like what we do, it's not going to be the effort of part of something bigger.
Hmm.
And then it's still just hard, right? Because we know it's never going to realize. That's the little something in collaboration that I didn't get in the 2016 DAO, and which is something that I was hoping will happen, perhaps also with ArchiDAO as well.
Hmm.
Yeah, maybe the diversity that you mentioned earlier can be a very good asset. So if one person has a shadow, that can be a bright side of the other person. And then together as
Mm,
a team, something good can come out in a productive manner as well. So yeah, that was
yeah,
an
yeah.
interesting insight.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
sorry, Bridget, you have another question? I,
No, no, go ahead, go ahead. Yeah.
no,
I have
I'm just
tons of
curious.
questions.
Yeah, I'm just curious because you mentioned like incentivization, right? And this is kind of like the new sort of way to develop business models around blockchain technologies, right? If you're going to develop like a Web3 platform or any sort of app related to that, then like the go-to model, it seems like, all right, you're going to create tokens, and in some way people are going to get rewarded, and then that reward, that's what incentivizes you to carry out like some task or whatever. Um, do you see this as a way, like for example, in argue that we're talking about, like how do you incentivize people to collaborate, right, and then perform like these things, like you said, like come together in a mission to develop projects. Do you see this as a viable way of pursuing like businesses or like a new way of doing businesses, for like architecture or design work, and or is there some sort of fallacy that maybe we're not seeing where maybe that's not the right approach because it's kind of more functioning like a regular company, right? Like a company pays you, or maybe they give you like stock options at the beginning, um, to sort of motivate you to like carry out the work.
Hmm. That's kind of like a trick question, right?
Yeah, it's
Um,
hard, but it's like one of those things that is I see at the moment where like everybody's doing like this kind
yeah,
of
I
methodology to develop
much,
Web3
yeah,
platforms. Yeah.
yeah,
much needed question, I guess.
yeah, I know. I guess I understand that when we dive into blockchain, we wanted it to be different from what the world has, right? And then
Hmm.
there's this ideology that it's completely peer-to-peer, we're just going to be a bunch of people. But well, what I can say is blockchain can be centralized, decentralized, and distributed at the same time. And as a tool, right? It depends on who uses it and where it's used and how it's used. Jensk also mentioned this in the DAO white paper, which basically say that the DAO doesn't do any more than storing and transmitting Ethereum coin. It doesn't produce a
Hmm.
product, it doesn't build a software. All of that is dependent on the contractor. So what he's mentioning there is basically just use DAO as replacing a banking system. All right, same as the Bitcoin white paper. Like, don't expect that with that in place, you can have the perfect governance where people are going to work. So, if we really have to be realistic, no system is truly centralized or decentralized or distributed in nature. Like in a natural environment, it's always centralized, decentralized, and distributed at the same time. So, we should be really comfortable that the business model or corporate model that we come up with is not ideologically distributed, because
Hmm.
that's not realistic. Like no human work that way. Um, so if you ask, I don't think that incentivize is good or bad, but obviously it's dependent on how, right? And if ArchiDAO can actually bring the effort institution together with individual, that for me would be the perfect state. So we're synthesizing both centralized and distributed effort, and obviously um, it's also the question about the information economy. Should it be a free market? Like, should it be a neoliberal approach that no one should intervene? So it's not a unique blockchain problem. It's actually situated within a larger context. Or if there's a market, does the public authority have the responsibility to actually regulate and incentivize? Because, they were paying tax, they should protect the people.
Hmm.
Of course, in a Bitcoin ideology, the network protects itself. But in a real world situation, blockchain has to be part of the larger society. Then obviously it has to incentivize collaboration between different effort. And just for instance, Hong Kong has quite a centralized planning model. So obviously, what it needs is more citizen participation. And within that context, we can use blockchain to decentralize. But perhaps within another context where people are just really distributed, what they need is some centralized incentivization for them to do something together.
Hmm.
For instance, I think there's a project that UN or is it the World Bank is doing in Nairobi or something, and then I think they're using the metaverse to collect citizen opinion. So the citizen opinion isn't going to force the government to build a park. It doesn't have the statutory position, but what it does is that is an immutable ledger that recorded all the citizen opinion. And after the government made their decision, we can always go back to that. And that gives us the benefit because if it's a paper document, it might end up somewhere, somebody's trash can, right? We would
Hmm.
never
Yeah.
know. So this was one of the examples that I was just discussing with a professor, Tat Lam at CHK the other day. And that's also when you get into the detail, it's really about how we engage the participation, make people feel like they have the agency, even though
Hmm.
it's not going to be realized 100%, but then they have like a form of expression or they have the literacy, like they learn the skill to actually express themselves. So the communication process is perhaps more important than the end product, right? In most of these situations.
Yeah, yeah. Definitely. That's right. That's interesting. I didn't know they were doing that. That's pretty. So it sounds like an interesting experiment too, just to see if it actually works out in the long run. We've seen like a lot of. It seems like a lot of projects more recently are exploring like these metaverse, like participatory, like design approaches. And like if they get incorporated with blockchain, when you build like a trace of all these things, it could probably definitely be helpful. Um, and I guess in relation to that, you have explored issues of cybernetics in your work. Um, can you maybe give us a little bit of information about that and how maybe that's related to like blockchain? Like how does entropy design develop within this?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually just my bag of tricks, right? When I started um, my digital history and theory research, it started with cybernetics, yes, and information theory. So
Hmm.
it's more like a Marvel movie where you have Norbert Wiener, you have Claude Shannon, you have Neumann, you have John Nash, and then you have Erwin Schrödinger. So then together you have cybernetics, information, game, and quantum theory, and they actually share the same history, right? Which is the 20th century post-war period. So after the war, all the scientists has to do something, and they that gave them the time to actually, information theory, the first paper by Claude Shannon in 1948, cybernetic book by Norbert Wiener in 1948. So it was just a few years after the war ended, and everyone was just like back at wherever they came from, and then they started writing. So that's a bag of trick, and obviously entropy isn't really, it's the center within information theory and not so much in the center of cybernetics, but Weiner wrote a book called Human Use of Human Being in 1950, and inside he sort of discuss what he thinks entropy is. And the problem with
Hmm.
entropy is basically how you define information, right? Because if information is just one bit, it's just the most normal bit. It doesn't do more or less to the messages that's supposed to store within this bit, right? So the problem that Shannon was dealing with is how you can store more messages in one bit of information. And that bit of information is actually not the message itself, but how much surprises or disorder you can measure in the message. And then you take that as stored in one bit. So um, its compression, its bandwidth, is ways in which we can communicate without corrupting the signals. So that's what entropy is. It's the surprises in information. But to Norbert Wiener, it's different because Wiener was doing a lot on prediction, on interpolation, extrapolation, and time series. So he looks at information not from the time domain, but from the frequency domain. And what he realized is that, well, the prediction of less likely event is going to give more information. So for him, information is entropy, which is surprises, a measure of disorder, a measure of surprises, but by an inverse algebraic sign. So it's actually negative entropy, right?
Hmm.
So if we try to think about that, if architecture, the production of architecture is first and foremost the production of information, then to Shannon, it's the increase of entropy, the increase of options and surprises. And for Wiener, it's the decrease of entropy. So when all possibilities collapse into reality. So that's my bag of tricks, right? Because that's
Hmm.
just like some theory. How do we actually do that? Well, I mean, if we try to think about it in the ArchiDAO situation, it would mean that there needs to be two chains. The first chain is that there are a lot of people who increase option. And the second chain is that there are more realistic and serious people who try to collapse possibility into a specific context. And the two chain, front end, back end, they have to sort of work together. But how do they define payoff between each other? That's perhaps a blockchain problem.
Hmm.
So, like, with so much of possibilities and the way you describe cybernetics and stuff, do you think these are like fad, like just a craze for the short duration in design, design field?
Um, Cybernetics, I don't think it's a fad. Blockchain, as I was saying, it is and it is not at the same time, depending on how you think about it. to be really honest, if we think about NFT, blah, blah, it is a fad, but perhaps the message behind it's not. And the message behind would not be called NFT, right?
So basically, it's a
It's just like,
conversation that
yeah,
is leading to the another conversation.
yeah, exactly. I mean, it depends. If you look at blockchain as a way that we can really quickly fractionalize something and then we can realize value, take the money and leave, then obviously it would be a fad because after people take the money and leave, they don't come back, right?
Yeah.
But if we take blockchain as something that has social economic value, right? Even if it's just a marketing thing where the government gets people to come and work together, but still it tackles into the more fundamental question within, informal economies, how we formalize them. That's also something that the DAO white paper talks about. The governance between good work and bad work, that's also a fundamental problem in design. So we try to situate that within the longer historical time frame, then it wouldn't be a fad. So ultimately, it's depending on the kind of community and the people that you're attracting, right? If it's the 2016, the DAO, then obviously it's just a bunch of speculative financier who wouldn't spend the time to, go deep into the proposal of the innovative projects. And you have the same trap in the attention economy, right? All this Google, Facebook, well, at least they have to take legal responsibility. Yeah, but if we fall into the same trap of attention economy, which is like people voting based on who catches their attention, then the whole DAO thing, for sure, after it go bankrupt, it's not going to come back again.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is the seriousness of the topic and the awareness, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it brings out the bigger problem that we're very used to this idea of one man, one vote, which is completely fine. But for me, voting is not the end, it's actually the means to an end, right? So voting is supposed to be an instrument for us to sort of map a picture over the percentage of people who agree and disagree with certain stuff. But if we're just taking a number as the end, then it's kind of reductivist situation there. So, and obviously, if we take it in a Western context or in, let's say, Singapore or Hong Kong, we'll have a totally different opinion over what voting is and should be. Something should happen before the process, something should happen after the process, but how should it happen, right? In ancient Athenian democracy, citizen size is around 30,000, but the whole population, including slaves, women, and children who are not citizen, is about 200,000. So, and their political system is dealing with something more simple. Like the referendum document of Brexit is like 1,246 pages. Seriously, 1,020, because I was recently writing a paper on that. And you're asking people to read 1,200 pages of document and ask them to full art something. That's kind of like, I wouldn't understand personally. Even if I'm trained as an architect, you ask me to read a master plan, I don't understand everything about it.
Yeah.
So there's a responsibility there that someone should visualize what it is, tell us what's happening, but that at the same time, maybe we should also make use of expert intelligence and general intelligence and how they collaborate, right? So in ancient Athenian democracy, 2,000 years ago, we can fit everyone in a stadium and then you ask them to raise their hand and then they can debate and everyone can still hear. But UK population is like 67 million and China has like 1.4 billion. So how do you even make a decision? Then ultimately is what Christoph Jansk was trying to do, like governance and decision making. But I perhaps don't agree with what he think can work, which is debate and vote. For me, it's still more about control and communication. So the Norbert Wiener way. You have to get in there, do some work together. Voting is just a way we assess opinion. But then there's also the most important point is about aligning stakeholders' interests. And you can't do that by voting because that's just going to polarize. And also you have to align stakeholders' will and vision, right? And how do we actually understand vision? It's non-discursive. And that's also something that computer graphics or architectural visualization can help us. And it also means that designer has to work with citizen to actually tell us what this future might be. Yeah. And, in Chinese, we have a saying that the brain, like the opinion change a lot every day, but the heart is more stable, right? And the heart is something, I mean, it's like a metaphor. It can mean will, it can mean interest, it can mean vision, but it's not opinion, right? So that's perhaps the governance thing that the Bitcoin white paper didn't talk about, the DAO white paper didn't talk about, Claude Shannon didn't talk about information theory because it's just maths. But the human side of it, I think architects has to think about.
Well said. Wow.
Yeah,
This was
interesting answer.
Yeah. I mean, this is just in time because I'm like writing the new paper on DAO and situate that in co-housing. So I've been thinking about these questions a lot, like what's realistic for us to do and not live in our own fantasy. And it needs a lot of honesty and courage.
And provides, I
Yeah.
have another question to follow that, and this could be just a quick answer, but like recently I've just been seeing that people are saying that the issues with DAOs, and I think this kind of touches on what you're saying, is that they have an issue with scalability. And I
Yeah,
think it's
of
because of
course.
that sort of alignment that you're talking about. And do
Yeah.
you see this as pretty much as a way, like if you get past like a certain scale, then it becomes something where now you're delegating like a traditional like company structure, or some sort of hierarchical structure like that? Or is it
Yeah.
actually still possible to continue with like a DAO, decentralized autonomous organization?
Yeah. That's a great question. I mean, everybody is talking about scalability. Obviously, centralized system better with scalability, distributed system, it's hard. There's two ways we can think about that. The first way is we look to nature, look at the biggest single cell you
Mm-hmm.
can find, and it's something this size. And biologists have been trying to understand why they can't grow larger than this size, right? It's literally a sphere, and
Mm-hmm.
we can understand it better when we look at the section of the cell, because the membrane is responsible for regulating what goes in and what comes out. So the thickness of the membrane has a lot to do with how much nutrient, oxygen, energy you can provide to the interior content of the cell. So there's like a membrane and content proportion that gets to a threshold and the cell can't get bigger anymore. Because if it gets bigger, then the interior content of the cell don't get enough nutrient sort of situation. And we can think about that also the same in human organization, right? Um, but obviously, another way to think about this is to situate that within architecture. So if we really look into co-housing, crowdsourcing, and crowdfunding, same as what the DAO was supposed to do, right? But if we look in co-housing, which mostly is in Europe, they largely have 20 to 40 household, right? And it's an intention. It's almost like a design intention that there's only 20 to 40 household, because beyond that is first hard to regulate, it's hard to access to risk just by financial risk. I mean, what if one household gets broke? So who's going to step in and take, just pay back the debt or whatever? And
Mm-hmm.
what if one household like completely oppose the entire project or the design decision? Then you have to wait a lot of years to, have a lawsuit, and that's like tough. That's why 20 to 40 for them is a good intimate size where people can come to a consensus. But from where I'm from in Hong Kong, or if you go to Singapore, China, blah, blah, um, a private residential tower is at least 200 to 400 households. So it's like 10 times. If it's a public housing, more targeting demographic and need, 500 units. How can you have 500 different conflicting values together and synthesize that? How can we have 500 different financial risks? And obviously, people who need affordable housing is generally subject to higher financial risk in the face of crisis, right? Every time we have
Mm-hmm.
a financial crisis, lower income people, they're the most volatile and, they're in the most harm. So if we, that's kind of how we think about scalability also in the DAO, right? Because after all, if we know that beyond 40 household it's hard to make an architecture, then it gave us a reference point over how, distributed system with some sort of governance, what is the threshold that you can work with in real physical spaces, and after that it doesn't work. So maybe outside the field of architecture it can get a lot bigger,
Mm-hmm.
but in real world example, that's like the threshold that we have been dealt with today. And we have to take small steps, right? Maybe next step is we work with, I don't know, 100 people, 100 households. That's almost like 300 people, and then we see, can we have a non-European way of dealing with it, involving DAO and blockchain, and under what context? But obviously that would take a team of researchers to even just put together a report and start assessing that risk. Yeah, so scale is a problem. Another, maybe just to touch upon something about construction as well. Obviously, in the free market, we do speculative construction, right? In the sense that we don't know who is going to live in it before we build. We just
Mm-hmm.
kind of assess what the market wants, we build, and then we sell it to potential buyers. So in that case, we can't do the crowdsourcing, crowdfunding thing, right? It will need centralized provision because we don't know who the user is. And that's what happened in most countries, and it happens like that for a reason. Because, for instance, 500 household, the foundation has to go so deep into the ground. It needs the developer. You can't just kick central actor out. You need
Mm-hmm.
banking institute to finance big projects, and you need mortgages for lower income people as well. And if it's like Hong Kong, then obviously the government pay for the entire process. um, each household pays like $100 a month. Uh, so obviously the scale problem is actually the organization problem. How can we have extremely big actor together with extremely small actor and have them work together?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the crucial role will be the, I don't know, community manager or the person who is, or the team who is trying to bind all them together.
Yeah. Maybe also one way to think about that, when I was reading through the DAO white paper, it reminds me a lot of the form of direct and representative democracy in the United States. So you can have a curator, right, which is metaphorically a sort of president. But then the difference is that as an individual, the minority right is you can always vote the curator away. You can nominate yourself as curator, or you can split DAO into a separate chain and then you have another curator, or you can pull out and withdraw your investment. So that was a security mechanism that Jensk was trying to deal with in crowdfunding. But obviously, that's like one form of democracy. In China, they're doing something like consultative democracy. So just a really simple thing to do is, what if we have a DAO that's in a consultative democracy version, not in a representative democracy version? Then it will be totally different, right? It's like in the architecture space, in the UK Parliament, it's a square, and everybody's lined up on two sides. So you have two parties. And in the Communist Party, they use sort of like a half circle, more like this Greek or Roman forum. And then there's like a bunch of people sitting in front, and then there's like a half circle of people sitting at the back. And that represents a different power structure and how we actually exercise governance. And I think DAO can perhaps also have this different topology of governance model. And then you can map DAO on this different topology and see, what kind of variation it gives us. Because if the ideology is that the DAO can always split into a new chain, then it's like cell. It keeps splitting,
Mm-hmm.
and some will die out, some will exist. But then they should all have a different governance version. Not to say that certain version is the best one and everyone has to follow, because that's just unreasonable, right? Yeah.
Certainly, this conversation is very interesting. So, like,
I hope it
do you
is.
have a, yeah, it is indeed. Like, I learned a lot personally. Um, so, like, if anybody has any questions, don't worry, we have you covered because Provide's gonna be in our panel discussion at NFT launch. So for the dates, you just stay tuned to the Akidao because we are still finalizing the dates. But that time, I'm gonna throw a lot of questions because it is gonna be really interesting conversations.
Yeah.
Um,
No, I have to thank
Daniel,
you guys.
oh yeah.
I think the ArchiDAO is great. I mean, I've been working on the blockchain stuff in 2019, and all I do is like write this paper, get them out there, and I do some artsy experiment with my collaborators, trying to make computer graphics, but not actually building that stuff. Yeah, so I think the community that you're trying to put together is just amazing, and thank you for doing that.
That's
Thank
really
you.
amazing.
We appreciate that.
So before we leave, I have some would you rather questions for you, very quick and fun. So the first question is like, would you like to go back to your past and meet your ancestors, or in the future to meet your great grandchildren?
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Okay, so that's also nice actually. Um, but okay, so the other question is like, would you like to listen to 70s music or the current music we have?
Okay, I either like classical or I like techno.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so I know there's like a great gap in between, but then at the same time, I
Yeah,
find there's so many similarities between them. It's like Sakamoto. Sakamoto is one of the first techno guy in Japan, and he does all of these cinematic music even for the movie that Leonardo DiCaprio did, where he was looking at the first bunch of European arriving at North America. What's that movie? I forgot. Revenants. Anyway, it's like a Hollywood movie. Sakamoto did all of the cinematic music, and what he said
mm,
was that cinema music is going to be the next classical in 100 years.
Hmm.
that's true.
Yeah, yeah. So for me, it's techno, cinema music, and classical music.
Okay. Okay, so for your birthday, what would you like, the cash or the gifts?
The cash or the gifts?
Uh-huh.
Cash.
Actually, okay, so what is your choice like to be most popular or the smartest? Only one is
Smartest.
the choice. Oh, perfect.
Smartest.
What would you like to sew your clothes or to grow your food?
To what?
To sew your clothes? To
Sew
make
my
your own
clothes.
clothes? Yeah.
Ah, or
Grow your food.
career food.
Grow your food.
Ah,
Yeah. Sorry for the bad English.
no, it's
Yeah.
okay. I can't. I believe in this global local supply chain. Yeah.
Okay. So Antarctica or Sahara Desert?
Sahara Desert or where?
Antarctica?
Ugh. Why does it have to be this way? I don't.
Okay.
Oh, it's so hard. Ugh,
The
desert,
first thing that came in your mind is the answer. That's it. It's such a very
desert,
right question.
The desert.
Okay.
desert.
Perfect. To provide, we are looking forward that you come and you're always welcome at Akidao to have discussions or it will be really good to have you as someone that we can look at to your your theses and your all your work and your studies that you're doing for years. So we are looking forward for the conversations ahead that we're gonna have.
Yeah, I look forward to that as well. Thank
Okay.
you so much, guys.
Thank you, Fawaz.
Thank
It's
you.
been a pleasure.
All right.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
See you soon. Send me the video, okay?
Yeah,
Good.
I
Bye bye.